The war room fell silent as another red marker appeared on the star map. That made 17 colonies lost in just 3 months. Commander Thalax stared at the display with tired eyes, his green scales looking dull under the harsh lights of the command center. He had been fighting this war for 3 years, and every day brought more bad news. The Vrekath Empire was winning, and everyone knew it. Thalax belonged to the Saros, a proud reptilian race that valued honor above all else. His people had formed the Galactic Coalition along with 2 other species. The Chiracs were insect-like beings with brilliant minds for technology. The Luminar were beings of pure energy who could manipulate light itself. Together, they represented the civilized races of this part of the galaxy. But civilization was losing to savagery. The Vrekath were conquerors who knew only one way to fight. They destroyed everything in their path. When they took a planet, they killed everyone on it. They used weapons that the Coalition had banned centuries ago. Biological weapons that melted flesh. Chemical agents that poisoned entire atmospheres. They even took prisoners and turned them into living bombs. The Coalition fought with honor. They followed the Galactic Accords, ancient laws that governed warfare between civilized species. They avoided civilian targets. They treated prisoners with respect. They used only approved weapons that killed cleanly. They believed that how you won a war mattered as much as winning itself. This belief was killing them. Thalax walked through the corridors of the massive space station that served as Coalition headquarters. Everywhere he looked, he saw the signs of a failing war effort. Medical bays overflowed with wounded soldiers. Supply officers argued about rationing. Young officers moved with the shell-shocked expressions of people who had seen too much death too quickly. He made his way to the council chambers where the leaders of the Coalition were meeting. It was an emergency session, called after the fall of the Tertian system. 50,000 soldiers had died there in a single day. The Vrekath had used a weapon that created a gravity well, crushing ships and bodies alike into a dense ball of metal and flesh. Supreme Chancellor Vorath stood at the center of the chamber. The Luminar leader glowed with a pale blue light that normally signified calm thinking, but today it flickered with orange streaks of distress. Around the circular room, the other council members sat in various states of despair. Vorath's voice resonated through the chamber. "We are facing extinction. Our fleets are being destroyed faster than we can build new ships. Our colonies are being wiped out. At our current rate of loss, the Vrekath will reach our homeworlds within a year." A Chirax counselor, her antennae drooping, spoke up. "We must negotiate. Surely the Vrekath will accept reasonable terms." "The Vrekath don't negotiate," Thalax said quietly. "They conquer or they die trying. There is no middle ground with them." Another counselor suggested increasing weapon production, but everyone knew the Coalition was already building weapons as fast as possible. They were not losing because of lack of equipment. They were losing because the Vrekath fought without any moral restraints whatsoever. That's when Vorath made his proposal. "There is one species we have not contacted," the Chancellor said, "one race that might be able to help us." The chamber went quiet. Everyone knew which species Vorath meant. "The humans," someone whispered. Humanity had achieved faster-than-light travel only recently. The Coalition had been observing Earth from a distance for several years, following their standard first contact protocols. What they had seen disturbed them greatly. Humans were a young species, barely out of their own solar system, but their planet's history was drenched in blood. They had fought wars continuously throughout their recorded history. They had developed weapons of incredible destruction and used them on each other. Nuclear bombs, chemical weapons, biological agents. Things that civilized species had banned thousands of years ago, humans still kept in stockpiles. Every major human civilization had committed what other species could only call atrocities: genocide, slavery, torture, mass murder. The humans had done it all to each other, repeatedly, across thousands of years. The coalition had decided to delay formal contact. Perhaps in a few more centuries, humanity would mature. Perhaps they would learn to value peace over violence. But now Vorath was suggesting they contact the very species they had deemed too dangerous to approach. "You cannot be serious," a Saros counselor said. "Humans are barbarians. They would be as dangerous to us as the Vrekath." "Perhaps," Vorath agreed, "but we are dead anyway if we do nothing. At least humans might give us a chance." The debate raged for hours. Some argued that humanity would simply take advantage of the coalition's weakness. Others worried that bringing humans into the galaxy would unleash a new threat. But slowly, desperately, the tide turned. Thalax himself spoke in favor of the proposal. "I have studied human military history," he told the council. "They are brutal, yes, but they are also innovative. They adapt quickly. They use tactics that no civilized species would consider. And most importantly, they know how to win." It passed by a margin of just 3 votes. Thalax was chosen to lead the delegation to Earth. It made sense, since he had studied humanity more than most. As he prepared his ship for the journey, he wondered what he was bringing into the galaxy. Would the humans be their salvation or their doom? The journey to Earth took 2 weeks. As Thalax's ship entered the solar system, he was surprised by what he saw. Human space stations orbited several planets. Mining operations scarred their moon. Dozens of ships moved between worlds, most of them carrying weapons. For a species so new to space travel, humans had militarized their home system with impressive speed. Earth traffic control directed them to a landing site in North America. When Thalax emerged from his ship, he got his first direct look at humans. They were bipedal mammals, relatively small compared to Soros, with skin in various shades of brown and pink. They looked fragile, but their eyes told a different story. The human military officers who greeted him had eyes that constantly scanned for threats. They moved with an economy of motion that suggested military training. Even their diplomatic smile seemed calculated. Thalax delivered his message simply. "The Galactic Coalition is at war. We are losing. We need help. In exchange, we offer full membership in the Coalition, access to our technology, and knowledge of thousands of inhabited worlds." The lead human officer, who introduced himself as General Peterson, listened without expression. Then he asked a single question. "What's in it for us?" Thalax had expected questions about the enemy, about strategy, about the nature of the conflict. This question caught him off guard. "Survival," Thalax said. "If the coalition falls, the Vrekath will continue expanding. Eventually, they will reach Earth." General Peterson nodded slowly. "We'll need to discuss this with our leaders. But I'll tell you right now, if we fight to win. We don't do half measures." As Thalax waited for Earth's decision, he watched human news broadcasts. They showed wars happening on Earth even now. Humans were still fighting each other while reaching for the stars. It was madness, but it was exactly the kind of madness the Coalition needed. 3 days later, he received Earth's answer. Humanity would help, but on their terms. They would send an expeditionary force under their own command. They would fight using their own tactics. The Coalition could accept this or find help elsewhere. Thalax accepted immediately. He had no choice. As he prepared to leave Earth, General Peterson gave him a warning. "You're asking us to be monsters for you. Just remember, once you let the monster out, it's hard to put it back." Thalax would remember those words in the months to come. He would remember them as he watched what humans could do when unleashed upon an enemy. He would remember them as the galaxy changed forever. The delegation returned to Coalition space with humanity's answer. The die was cast. For better or worse, humans were coming to war. The human fleet arrived at Coalition headquarters exactly on schedule. Commander Thalax watched from the observation deck as 12 ships emerged from faster-than-light travel. They were smaller than he expected, angular and dark, covered in sensor-absorbing plates that made them look like pieces of the void itself. The lead ship was called the Valkyrie. According to human mythology, Valkyries were spirits that chose who would die in battle. Thalax found the name unsettling. The docking procedure took an hour. Human ships, it turned out, used different connection systems than Coalition vessels. Everything about them was different, built on different principles with different priorities. Where Coalition ships emphasized crew comfort and diplomatic facilities, human ships seemed designed solely for fighting. Colonel Jack Hayes was the first human to step off the Valkyrie. He was tall for a human, with short gray hair and pale blue eyes that seemed to catalog everything they saw. His face carried scars, some old enough to be faded white lines, others still pink and recent. He wore a simple military uniform with minimal decoration, but every Coalition officer in the docking bay could sense the authority he carried. Behind Hayes came Major Lisa Grant, a woman with dark skin and calculating brown eyes. She carried a datapad and was already studying the station's layout even as she walked. Captain Nick Torres followed, a compact man with the kind of casual alertness that marked Special Forces soldiers across every species. Dr. Amy Chen brought up the rear, a slight woman whose friendly smile seemed out of place among the hard-faced military officers. The welcome ceremony was brief. Hayes clearly had no patience for diplomatic formalities. Within an hour, the human delegation was in a briefing room and Thalax was explaining the war. He brought up the star map and showed them 3 years of defeats. Red marks indicated lost colonies. Orange marks showed contested systems. The green marks that represented secure Coalition territory seemed to shrink every time Thalax updated the map. The Vrekath Empire started this war by attacking our mining colonies in the Outer Rim, Thalax explained. We thought it was a minor border dispute. By the time we realized their true intentions, they had already established forward bases in 17 systems. Major Grant studied the troop movement patterns. Your response was defensive. Yes, we established a perimeter and prepared to negotiate. They don't want to negotiate, Hayes said. It was not a question. No, the Vrekath believe in conquest. They take worlds and eliminate the existing population. They use chemical weapons, biological agents, nuclear bombardment. They don't take prisoners except to use them as weapons. Thalax pulled up footage from a recent battle. Coalition soldiers fought bravely, holding their positions, following proper military doctrine. Then the Vrekath released a gas weapon that dissolved organic tissue. Thousands died screaming. Captain Torres leaned forward, watching the footage with professional interest rather than horror. What was your response? Hayes asked. We filed a formal protest citing the Galactic Accords. We documented the war crime for the historical record. Hayes looked at him. That's it? They used chemical weapons and you filed paperwork? The Galactic Accords forbid the use of such weapons. By documenting their crimes, we establish moral and legal superiority. Moral superiority doesn't win wars, Hayes said flatly. Dead soldiers don't care who had the moral high ground. Thalax felt his scales ripple with irritation. We are civilized beings. We fight with honor. We do not descend to the level of barbarians simply because our enemy has no morals. Then you'll die civilized, Major Grant said. Is that what you want? To be the most honorable corpses in the galaxy? The room fell silent. Other Coalition officers present looked uncomfortable. This was exactly what they had feared. Humans had no respect for the principles that separated civilization from chaos. Dr. Chen spoke for the first time, her voice gentle. Commander Thalax, can I ask you something? How many soldiers have you lost in this war? 3,400,000. And how many Vrakath? Thalax hesitated. Our estimates suggest around 800,000. So you're losing soldiers at a rate of 4 to 1, Shen said. Your forces are dying while inflicting minimal casualties on the enemy. With respect, Commander, how is that honorable? How is it honorable to send your people to die in a war you're fighting with one hand tied behind your back? Thalax wanted to argue, but the words stuck in his throat. He had asked himself the same question during countless sleepless nights. Hayes stood and walked to the star map. He studied it in silence for several minutes, his fingers tracing attack routes and supply lines. Finally, he turned back to the room. We'll help you, but you need to understand something. Humans don't fight wars the way you do. We don't fight for honor or glory or moral superiority. We fight to win. We use every advantage we can find. We exploit enemy weaknesses without mercy. We do things that will make you uncomfortable. What kind of things? Asked a Chirax observer. Captain Torres answered. Ambush tactics, false retreats, feigned surrenders, attacks on supply lines and support infrastructure, psychological warfare, terror tactics. We make the enemy afraid to fight us. Those are dishonorable methods, Talax said. Maybe, Hayes agreed, but they work. You brought us here because you're desperate. Desperate enough to call in a species you've been avoiding because you think we're too violent. Well, we are violent. War is violence. If you want us to fight for you, we fight our way. Supreme Chancellor Vorath had been observing the meeting in silence. Now the Luminar leader's glow shifted to a deep orange, the color of difficult decisions. What are your terms? Vorath asked. Major Grant pulled up a document. Operational independence. Human forces operate under human command. We'll coordinate with coalition forces, but we make our own tactical decisions. We want full access to intelligence on Vrakath capabilities and positions. We want manufacturing rights for human weapon systems. And we want it understood that we will not follow the Galactic Accords when fighting the Vrakath. The last point caused an uproar. Several coalition officers started shouting at once. The Galactic Accords had governed warfare for thousands of years. They were the foundation of civilized conflict. Hayes waited for the noise to die down. The Vrakath aren't following your accords. Why should we? They use chemical weapons, so we'll use chemical weapons. They attack civilians, so we'll attack their civilians. They don't take prisoners, so neither will we. You match your enemy's tactics, or you lose. It's that simple. You would commit war crimes? Thalax asked. We would win, Hayes said. You can debate the morality after you've survived. Chancellor Vorath's glow pulsed with different colors as the Luminar leader considered. Finally, the decision was made. We accept your terms. Show us what humanity can do. We'll need detailed information on current Vrakath positions. Major Grant will coordinate with your intelligence officers. Captain Torres will begin training exercises with your special forces. Dr. Chen will study Vrakath biology to identify vulnerabilities. When will you be ready to engage the enemy? Thalax asked. Hayes smiled for the first time. It was not a comforting expression. We're already ready. The Vrakath are advancing on a mining colony called Tertian 7, correct? Your forces have been ordered to evacuate. Yes. 3 fleets have failed to hold that system. High Command considers it lost. Cancel the evacuation, Hayes said. We're going to Tertian 7. We're going to stop the Vrakath advance. And we're going to show the galaxy what happens when you fight humans. Over the next 2 days, Thalax watched the humans prepare. They moved with frightening efficiency, studying every scrap of data on Vrakath tactics. Major Grant built probability models of enemy behavior. Captain Torres ran his Marines through combat drills that looked more like assault courses than military training. Dr. Chen examined recordings of Vrakath soldiers with the enthusiasm of a child watching entertainment programs. The human fleet departed for Tertian 7 ahead of schedule. Thalax went with them, assigned as a liaison officer. As the Valkyrie accelerated toward the combat zone, he found Hayes on the bridge. "Why are you doing this?" Thalax asked. "Earth is far from here. The Vrakath won't reach your world for decades, even if they destroy the Coalition. You could have stayed out of this war." Hayes looked at the star field on the view screen. "There's an old saying on Earth. First they came for my neighbors, and I did nothing because I was not my neighbor. We learned a long time ago that ignoring evil doesn't make it go away. It just gives evil time to grow stronger." "But you'll use evil methods to fight evil," Thalax said. "Maybe. Or maybe we'll just use effective methods that you've convinced yourself are evil because they make you uncomfortable." "War isn't supposed to be comfortable, Commander. It's supposed to be finished. We're going to finish this war for you." Thalax looked at this strange, violent human and wondered again what the Coalition had unleashed. But as the Valkyrie jumped to faster-than-light speed, carrying them toward battle, he realized it was too late for doubts. Humanity had entered the war. The galaxy would never be the same. The Vrakath fleet numbered 47 warships, more than enough to crush the small mining colony of Tertian 7. They had done this dozens of times before. Arrive in overwhelming force, destroy any resistance, eliminate the population, strip the planet of resources, and move on to the next target. Commander Thalax watched the Vrakath fleet on the long-range sensors as they approached the colony. Standard Vrakath formation, with heavy battleships at the center and smaller cruisers forming a protective screen. Their supply ships stayed far behind the main battle group, safe from any potential counterattack. At least, they would have been safe from a Coalition counterattack. Colonel Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, studying the enemy formation with the same intensity that a predator might study prey. His human fleet consisted of only 12 ships, outnumbered nearly 4-1. Any Coalition commander would have considered this a suicide mission. Hayes looked relaxed. "Major Grant, analysis," he said. Major Grant pulled up her tactical display. "They're following pattern Delta 7, the same formation they've used in their last 9 engagements. Heavy ships advance first to draw our fire. Then the cruisers flank while the battleships bombard. They expect us to either retreat or die gloriously. Captain Torres, are your teams in position?" "Affirmative, sir. Insertion craft are hidden in the asteroid field. We're ready to go." "Dr. Chen?" The scientist looked up from her workstation. "I've identified a weakness in their ship design. Vrakath vessels use a centralized power distribution system. If we can take out the main relay, the entire ship goes dark. Also, Vrakath have poor vision in red spectrum light. I've uploaded the specifications to the marine units. Gentlemen, lady, let's show these conquerors what it means to fight humans. Execute Plan Whiskey Tango." Thalax felt confusion ripple through his scales. "What is Plan Whiskey Tango?" Hayes smiled. "Something your Galactic Accords definitely wouldn't approve of." The Vrakath fleet continued its steady advance toward Tertian 7. They detected the human ships, but seemed unconcerned. 12 small vessels against their armada? This would be over quickly. Then the human ships did something unexpected. Instead of forming a defensive line or retreating, they scattered. Each ship went in a different direction at maximum speed, vectoring away from both the colony and the Vrakath fleet. The Vrakath fleet commander must have been confused, but he did what Vrakath always did. He ordered his ships to pursue and destroy. The fleet broke formation, individual groups of ships chasing after different human vessels. That was when the trap sprang. The human ships suddenly reversed course, but they didn't head back toward the Vrakath battleships. Instead, they curved around and accelerated toward the Vrakath supply ships, which had been left completely undefended. Major Grant's tactical analysis had been perfect. The Vrakath formation was designed to destroy enemies who fought honorably. who engaged in direct combat. It had never been designed to defend against an enemy who ignored the main battle group entirely and went straight for the logistics. The human ships fell on the supply vessels like wolves on sheep. Missiles and laser fire tore through unarmored hulls. Fuel tankers exploded in brilliant fireballs. Ammunition ships detonated with enough force to damage nearby vessels. In less than 10 minutes, the entire Vrekath supply train was destroyed. The Vrekath fleet commander tried to turn his forces around, but the human ships were already gone, vanishing into the outer system, where the sensor interference from Tertian 7's sun made tracking difficult. Thalax watched in amazement. Hayes had just crippled the Vrekath fleet without firing a single shot at their warships. Without fuel and ammunition, the Vrekath fleet was stranded. "Now we go to Phase 2, Hayes said. "Captain Torres, you're up." "Roger that. Marines, we are go for insertion." From their hiding spots in the asteroid field, 6 small human craft emerged. They were dropships, designed for one purpose: getting soldiers onto enemy vessels. They accelerated toward the confused Vrekath fleet at speeds that would have killed most species from the Force, but humans had developed technology to survive such acceleration. The dropships didn't target the battleships. They went for the communication relay ship, the vessel that coordinated the entire Vrekath fleet's movements. Thalax watched as the human Marines breached the Vrekath ship. What happened next would haunt him for the rest of his life. Human soldiers fought nothing like coalition forces. There was no honor in their approach, no fair combat, no mercy. They used flashbang grenades that blinded and deafened. They employed smoke that made Vrekath sensors useless. They attacked from ventilation shafts and maintenance corridors. The Vrekath were fearsome warriors, each one standing 7 feet tall, with natural armor plating and claws that could tear through metal. In a fair fight, a single Vrekath could defeat 3 coalition soldiers. Humans didn't fight fair. They set traps. They used explosives. They shot Vrekath from behind. They used chemical irritants that specifically targeted Vrekath respiratory systems. Shen's research had been thorough. The most disturbing part was the psychological warfare. Captain Torres had his Marines broadcast the sounds of dying Vrekath over the ship's communication system. They left bodies in strategic locations, arranged to maximize fear. They moved through the ship like ghosts, striking without warning and disappearing before the Vrekath could respond. Within an hour, the communication relay ship was under human control. Major Grant immediately began using it to send false orders to the Vrekath fleet. Ships were sent to wrong coordinates. Captains were given conflicting commands. The Vrekath formation, already damaged by the loss of supplies, completely fell apart. That was when the human fleet returned. Hayes brought his 12 ships against the scattered, confused Vrekath forces. But even now, he didn't fight fair. He used the sun's radiation to mask his approach. He targeted ships that were isolated from the main group. He fired and retreated before the Vrekath could coordinate a response. The Vrekath fleet commander finally realized what was happening and tried to regroup his forces. But Major Grant had anticipated this. She had mined his most likely rally point 3 hours earlier. When the Vrekath ships tried to form up, they flew straight into a field of human proximity mines. Explosions tore through shields and hulls. Ships collided trying to avoid the mines. The neat military formation turned into chaos. Hayes pressed the advantage without mercy. Human ships darted in and out of the confusion, firing precisely targeted shots at damaged vessels. They didn't try to destroy every ship. Instead, they crippled them, leaving them drifting and helpless, broadcasting distress signals that further confused the Vrekath response. The battle lasted 8 hours. When it ended, the Vrekath fleet was completely destroyed. 47 ships reduced to drifting wreckage and escape pods. The human fleet had lost 1 destroyer when its captain had gotten too aggressive in the pursuit. 300 human soldiers were dead. 20,000 Vrekath were dead. Not a single one had been taken prisoner. Hayes had ordered that any Vrekath attempting to surrender be ignored. "They don't take prisoners," he had said. "Neither do we." As the human fleet regrouped around Tertian 7, Thalax sat in stunned silence. He had just witnessed something no coalition officer had seen in 3 years of war. A complete and total victory against the Vrekath. But the cost, the moral cost, weighed on him. Hayes found him in the observation deck, staring at the debris field that had once been a Vrekath fleet. "You're troubled," Hayes said. "You slaughtered them, even when they tried to surrender. They would have done the same to us. They have done the same to millions of your people." "That doesn't make it right." Hayes was quiet for a moment. "No, it doesn't, but it makes it necessary. You called us here because you were losing. You were losing because you fought with honor against an enemy who had none. We don't have that problem." "Where does it end?" Thalax asked. "If we fight like monsters to defeat monsters, what have we become?" "Survivors," Hayes said simply. "You can debate morality after you've won. But you have to win first. That's the part you keep forgetting." Thalax watched as human repair crews worked on the damaged destroyer. They moved efficiently, showing no sign of celebration, despite their overwhelming victory. To them, this was just work. Brutal, necessary work. News of the battle spread quickly through both Coalition and Vrekath space. For the first time in 3 years, a Vrekath advance had been completely stopped. More than stopped, it had been annihilated. The psychological impact was immediate. Coalition morale surged. Planets that had been preparing evacuation orders suddenly had hope. Recruitment for the military increased by 300% in a single week. But there was also fear. Not just fear of the Vrekath, but fear of humanity. The recordings of the battle, the ruthless efficiency, the complete lack of mercy, it disturbed many coalition citizens. Some called for the human forces to be sent home. Chancellor Vorath addressed the coalition in a public broadcast. "We asked humanity for help because we were desperate. They have given us victory. We may not like their methods, but we cannot deny their effectiveness. The choice is simple. Accept human help and survive, or maintain our moral purity and die." The debate would continue for months, but the reality was already settled. Humanity had entered the war, and they were winning. On the Valkyrie, Colonel Hayes prepared for the next battle. There would be many more. The Vrekath Empire was vast, and one defeat would not stop them. But now they knew that humanity fought differently, and that knowledge would spread through the Vrekath ranks like poison. Fear was a weapon, and humans knew how to use it. 3 months after the victory at Tertian 7, the human presence in coalition military operations had grown significantly. General Jack Hayes, promoted after a string of successful engagements, now commanded a force of 50,000 human soldiers, spread across 12 battle groups. They served alongside coalition forces in every major theater of war. The results were undeniable. The Vrekath advance had stopped. For the first time since the war began, the coalition was holding territory rather than losing it. In some sectors, they were even pushing back, reclaiming worlds that had been given up for lost. But the cost of these victories troubled many coalition officers. Commander Thalax found himself assigned as a permanent liaison to human forces. He had witnessed a dozen battles now, and each one left him more disturbed than the last. The humans fought with a creativity for violence that seemed limitless. At the Battle of Corvus Station, Captain Nick Torres had dressed his Marines in captured Vrekath armor and infiltrated an enemy supply depot. The resulting massacre happened before the Vrekath even realized they were under attack. At the siege of Helion 3, Major Lisa Grant had calculated the exact moment when Vrekath forces would be rotating their command staff. A single missile strike killed 17 high-ranking officers in one blast. Decapitation strike, the humans called it. At the defense of the Chirax colony Nexus Prime, Human forces had used the civilian population as bait, allowing Vrekath forces to enter the city before springing a trap that killed thousands of enemy soldiers in close-quarters urban warfare. Each victory came with a moral price that the coalition was forced to pay. Thalax walked through a coalition military hospital ship, visiting wounded soldiers. In one ward, he found a young Luminar officer whose glow had turned a permanent gray, the color of trauma and emotional damage. "What happened to you?" Thalax asked gently. The Luminar's voice was hollow. "I was assigned to a human unit. We were hunting a Vrekath patrol that had destroyed a medical station. The humans tracked them for 3 days. When we finally found them, the humans didn't just kill them. They made it slow. They wanted the other Vrekath patrols to find the bodies and see what had been done. What did they do? Things I cannot speak of. Things that will haunt me forever. But it worked. 2 other Vrekath patrols in that sector abandoned their posts and retreated. The humans had weaponized fear so effectively that the enemy ran rather than fight." Similar stories were spreading through the coalition military. A Chirex medic reported that human soldiers sang songs about killing while they worked. A Soros officer had watched humans laugh while describing how they had trapped Vrekath troops in a building before collapsing it on them. The humans seemed to enjoy war in a way that disturbed every other species. Dr. Amy Chen tried to explain it to a group of horrified coalition observers. Humans use humor and emotional distance to process trauma. War is horrible, and we've been doing it to each other for our entire history. We develop psychological mechanisms to survive the horror we create. Yes, it looks disturbing from the outside, but it's how we stay sane while doing insane things. "You're not staying sane," a Kyrax officer said. "You're becoming the monsters you fight." Chen's expression hardened. "But we're monsters who are winning your war for you." The real test of the Human Coalition Alliance came when the Vrekath launched a massive assault on Sauros Prime, the homeworld of Thalax's species and the symbolic heart of the coalition. The Vrekath committed 300 ships to the attack, the largest fleet they had assembled since the war began. Intelligence suggested they planned to destroy Sauros Prime completely, to break coalition morale by eliminating their founding world. The coalition fleet defending the system numbered 96 ships. Even with human tactical support, they were outnumbered 3-1. High Command began planning evacuation protocols for the planet's population of 7 billion. General Hayes was on Earth coordinating reinforcements when he received the news. He immediately contacted Coalition headquarters. "Cancel the evacuation," he ordered. Chancellor Vorath's holographic image flickered with agitated colors. "General Hayes, we cannot hold against those numbers. We must save who we can. We're not evacuating. We're going to destroy their entire fleet. That's impossible." Hayes's expression was cold and certain. "No, it's not. But you're going to have to let me fight this battle my way. Completely my way. No restrictions, no rules. Can you do that?" The channel was silent for a long moment. Finally, Vorath spoke. "Do what you must. Save my people." Hayes arrived at Sauros Prime 3 days before the Vrekath fleet. He brought every available human ship, 42 vessels in total. Combined with the Coalition Defense Fleet, he had 138 ships against 300. Commander Thalax attended the battle planning session. He expected Hayes to arrange a defensive perimeter, to use the planet's orbital defenses to maximum advantage, to prepare for a fighting retreat that would allow civilian evacuation. Hayes had other plans. "We're going to turn Sauros Prime into a trap," he announced. "The Vrekath expect us to defend it. Instead, we're going to use it as bait." Major Grant pulled up the tactical display. "We'll position the Coalition fleet in standard defensive formation. Make it look like you're preparing for a conventional defense. The Vrekath will commit their forces to overwhelm you. While they're focused on the defense fleet, Hayes continued. My human ships will be hidden in the planet's shadow, using the orbital stations to mask our sensor signatures. When the Vrekath commit to their attack, we'll hit them from behind. A Saros admiral objected. That still leaves us outnumbered. They'll destroy the defense fleet before you can disable enough of their ships. That's where it gets interesting, Captain Torres said. We're going to mine the orbital approach vectors, but not with regular mines. We're using nuclear devices. The room erupted in shock. Nuclear weapons in planetary orbit was considered one of the worst violations of the Galactic Accords. The radiation alone could damage the planet's ecosystem. If anything went wrong, billions could die. Thalax stood abruptly. You cannot use nuclear weapons near my homeworld. I will not allow it. Hayes met his gaze. Commander, I understand your concern, but the Vrekath are coming here to kill everyone on this planet anyway. My way, we have a chance to save them. Your way, they all die for certain. Choose. It was the hardest decision Thalax had ever faced. Trust these violent humans with his entire species' survival, or watch his homeworld burn. He chose to trust. The Vrekath fleet arrived exactly on schedule. 300 warships, bristling with weapons, confident in their overwhelming superiority. They detected the Coalition defense fleet and moved to attack formation, just as Hayes had predicted. The Coalition ships fought bravely, holding the line, even as Vrekath firepower began to overwhelm them. Ships exploded. Thousands died in the opening minutes of combat. To the Vrekath, it looked like another inevitable victory. Then the human fleet emerged from the planet's shadow. 42 ships against 300 should have been suicide. But Hayes had positioned his forces perfectly. The human ships hit the Vrekath rear guard, targeting command vessels and communication relays. Precisely coordinated strikes disabled key ships in seconds. At the same moment, the nuclear mines activated. Hayes had calculated the Vrekath approach vectors with mathematical precision. The mines detonated in sequence, creating walls of radiation and debris that fractured the Vrekath formation. Ships collided. Communication broke down. The organized fleet became a confused mob. Major Grant's tactical squadrons exploited every gap. Human fighters, piloted by individuals who seemed to have no fear of death, flew directly into Vrekath formations. When they ran out of missiles, they used their ships as weapons, ramming critical systems on larger vessels. Captain Torres led boarding actions on disabled Vrekath ships. His Marines moved through enemy vessels like death itself, clearing them deck by deck. They took no prisoners. They showed no mercy. They were the nightmare that the Vrekath had been inflicting on others, returned tenfold. Thalax watched from the defense fleet's command ship as the humans fought with a ferocity that defied understanding. They lost ships at an alarming rate. 60% of the human fleet was destroyed or crippled. Thousands of human soldiers died. But they kept fighting. Even damaged ships, leaking atmosphere and on fire, continued to engage the enemy. Human pilots and destroyed fighters used their escape pods to board enemy vessels. Wounded Marines refused medical evacuation and continued fighting until they physically could not move. It was madness. It was heroic. It was horrifying. When the battle finally ended, the Vrekath fleet was annihilated. 300 ships reduced to wreckage. Not a single Vrekath vessel escaped. The Coalition defense fleet had taken heavy casualties, but survived. Saros Prime was safe. As the human survivors returned to their ships, Thalax watched the casualty reports. 27,000 humans dead. Nearly 65% of their force. They had paid in blood for this victory. He found General Hayes in the medical bay of the Valkyrie. The general had a bandage around his ribs, and his arm in a sling. But he was already reviewing after-action reports. "You saved my world," Thalax said quietly. Hayes looked up. "We did our job." "At terrible cost," So many of your people died. Yes, war costs lives, but those deaths meant something. 7 billion people are alive because of what we did here. That's worth the price. Is it? Thalax asked. Is any victory worth what you're becoming, what you're making us become? Hayes was quiet for a long moment. You asked us to be monsters for you, Commander. You can't complain when we're good at it. Thalax left the medical bay with a heavy heart. The victory at Sauros Prime would be celebrated throughout Coalition space. Humanity would be hailed as saviors. But Thalax had seen the truth. Humanity hadn't just saved the Coalition. They had changed it. The galaxy would never return to the old rules, the old honor. The humans had shown that ruthlessness worked better than nobility, and that lesson, once learned, could never be forgotten. The war turned after Sauros Prime. The Vrekath Empire, which had seemed unstoppable for 3 years, suddenly found itself facing an enemy that matched their brutality and exceeded their tactical skill. For the first time since the conflict began, the Vrekath were afraid. Human military doctrines spread through the Coalition forces like fire through dry grass. Not every species could adopt the ruthless tactics that came naturally to humanity, but even the most honorable Coalition officers began to understand that survival mattered more than tradition. Sauros commanders started using ambush tactics. Chirax engineers developed weapons that specifically targeted Vrekath biology. Even the Luminar, who had always considered themselves above physical violence, began to embrace more aggressive strategies. The galaxy was learning to fight like humans, and the Vrekath Empire was learning to fear. Commander Thalax, now promoted to Admiral after his role in the defense of Sauros Prime, watched these changes with mixed feelings. The Coalition was winning, truly winning, for the first time since the war began. But every victory came with a piece of their soul. He attended a memorial service for fallen Chirax soldiers who had died in a raid on a Vrekath supply base. The raid had been successful, destroying enough supplies to cripple Vrekath operations in an entire sector. But the Chirax commander had used human tactics, sacrificing half his force to ensure the mission succeeded. A year ago, such losses would have been unthinkable. Now, they were celebrated as strategic victories. General Jack Hayes stood on the bridge of the Valkyrie, planning the final campaign of the war. Major Lisa Grant had identified the critical weakness in Vrekath's strategic planning. Their entire empire was controlled from their homeworld, a heavily fortified planet called Vrekath Prime. If that world fell, the entire empire would collapse. Hayes assembled the largest human battle group ever committed to a single operation. 70 ships carrying 50,000 soldiers. It was nearly the entire human expeditionary force. Alongside them would be 200 Coalition vessels, the combined might of a dozen species. The objective was simple but terrifying. They would strike directly at the heart of the Vrekath Empire. They would bypass the defensive lines, ignore the fortress worlds, and attack Vrekath Prime itself. It was also the only way to end it. Chancellor Vorath personally approved the mission, despite objections from more cautious voices in the Coalition Council. The Luminar leader had changed over the course of the war. Where once Vorath's glow had been steady and calm, now it flickered with harder colors, the shades of someone who had made too many difficult choices. "End this war, General Hayes," Vorath said, "whatever it takes." The fleet departed from Coalition space 6 months after the Battle of Sauros Prime. They jumped through 17 systems, moving too quickly for Vrekath forces to intercept. Hayes had calculated the route perfectly, using stellar phenomena to mask their faster-than-light signatures. When they emerged in the Vrekath home system, the defenders were completely unprepared. Vrekath Prime was protected by the most powerful defensive network in the known galaxy. Orbital weapons platforms, minefields, automated defense stations, and a fleet of 200 warships. It had never been successfully attacked. Hayes had no intention of fighting through those defenses. Instead, he used a tactic that would have been impossible without Dr. Amy Chen's research. She had discovered that the Vrekath homeworld's orbital defense network operated on a specific frequency, one that could be disrupted by a precisely calibrated electromagnetic pulse. Captain Nick Torres led a stealth team onto one of the orbital platforms 3 days before the main fleet arrived. His Marines infiltrated the station, killed the crew in silence, and planted a device that Chen had designed. When activated, it would cascade through the entire defense network, shutting down every automated system simultaneously. The main battle fleet arrived and immediately came under fire from the Vrekath defense fleet. The fighting was brutal. Ships died on both sides. Space filled with debris and bodies. To the Vrekath defenders, it looked like a conventional assault, one they could win through superior defensive positioning. Then Torres activated the device. Every orbital platform, every automated gun, every minefield, everything shut down at once. The Vrekath defenders had relied on their automated defenses so completely that when those systems failed, their entire defensive strategy collapsed. The human and coalition fleet poured through the gap. Major Grant's tactical squadrons targeted the Vrekath defense fleet with surgical precision. Within 3 hours, the orbital space around Vrekath Prime belonged to the coalition. Admiral Thalax stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Vrekath Prime on the view screen. It was a beautiful world, with blue oceans and green continents. Billions of Vrekath lived on that planet. Civilians, children. People who had never chosen this war. Hayes appeared on the communication channel, his face grim. Admiral Thalax were ready to begin the bombardment. Coalition Command has authorized the use of all weapons necessary to force Vrekath's surrender. Thalax felt sick. He knew what Hayes was proposing. Total bombardment of the Vrekath homeworld. The same thing the Vrekath had done to dozens of coalition worlds. Justice, some would call it. Others would call it genocide. General Hayes, there are billions of civilians on that planet. I know, the Vrekath killed billions of your civilians. They showed no mercy, asked for no terms. They fought a war of extermination. Now they face the same choice. We're better than them, Thalax said desperately. We don't slaughter entire worlds. Hayes was quiet for a moment. You're right. We are better than them. That's why I'm not going to destroy Vrekath Prime. Watch. Hayes opened a channel to the entire Vrekath home system, broadcasting on all frequencies. His voice was cold and absolutely certain. Attention Vrekath Empire. This is General Jack Hayes of the Human Expeditionary Force. Your homeworld is now under our control. Your defense fleet is destroyed. Your orbital defenses are disabled. We have the power to destroy every city on your planet within the hour. You have inflicted this fate on dozens of other worlds. Now you will experience it yourselves unless you surrender immediately and unconditionally. The broadcast ended. The coalition fleet waited in orbit, weapons charged and targeting solutions locked on major Vrekath population centers. Thalax realized what Hayes was doing. He wasn't going to destroy Vrekath Prime. He was going to make them believe he would. The threat of annihilation was more powerful than the act itself. It took 17 minutes for the Vrekath response to come. The Vrekath Emperor himself appeared on the communication channel, his reptilian features twisted with hate and fear. "What are your terms?" the Emperor asked. Hayes transmitted a document that Major Grant had prepared months ago. Immediate ceasefire, complete demilitarization of the Vrekath Empire, war crimes tribunals for Vrekath leaders, reparations to affected worlds, occupation and oversight of Vrekath territory for no less than 50 years. The terms were harsh, but not impossible. The Vrekath would survive as a species and a culture. They would just never be a military threat again. The Emperor read the terms in silence. Behind him, Thalax could see other Vrekath leaders, their expressions showing shock that surrender was even being considered. The Vrekath had never surrendered in their entire history, but they had never faced humans before. "We accept," the Emperor said, and the war ended. The celebrations across Coalition space were massive. Worlds that had lived in fear for 3 years suddenly had peace. Species that had been facing extinction would survive. Humanity had saved the galaxy. But the cost of that salvation weighed heavily on everyone involved. General Jack Hayes returned to Earth as a hero. Parades were held in his honor. He was offered medals, titles, and positions of power. He declined them all and retired quietly to a small farm in the countryside. He never spoke publicly about the war again. Major Lisa Grant accepted a position at the new Coalition Military Academy, teaching strategy and tactics to the next generation of officers. Her classes were always full. Everyone wanted to learn from the human who had helped win an impossible war. Captain Nick Torres disappeared into classified operations. His work remained secret, but rumors suggested he was helping establish human intelligence networks throughout Coalition space. Some called him a hero, others called him a spy. He didn't seem to care what anyone thought. Dr. Amy Chen stayed with the Coalition, working to rebuild worlds damaged by the war. She focused on environmental restoration and healing the scars left by 3 years of brutal combat. Admiral Thalax found himself at a memorial wall on Saros Prime, looking at the names of the dead. Millions of Coalition soldiers from dozens of species, thousands of humans who had died fighting a war that wasn't originally theirs. He found the name of a human Marine who had saved his life during the Battle of Saros Prime. The young man had thrown himself on a Vrekath explosive device, dying instantly, but saving an entire squad of Saros warriors. The Marine's last words, recorded by his armor system, had been simple: "Tell my mom I did good." Thalax touched the engraved name gently. That was the truth about humans he had finally come to understand. They were capable of terrible violence, yes. They could be ruthless and brutal and frightening. But they could also be noble and sacrificial and brave. They were complicated, like all truly dangerous things. The galaxy had been saved, but it had been changed forever. The Galactic Accords, weakened by 3 years of being ignored, would never carry the same authority. Future wars would be bloodier, more ruthless, influenced by the human example. Some called this progress. Others called it corruption. Thalax didn't know which it was. What he did know was that when faced with extinction, the Coalition had chosen to survive, and humanity had shown them how. Whether that made humans saviors or monsters, or something in between, was a question that would be debated for generations. As Thalax walked away from the memorial, he passed a group of young Saros children playing in a park. They were alive because humans had fought for them. They would grow up in a galaxy that was safe because humans had been willing to do what needed to be done. A year ago, before the war turned, those children would have been evacuated to refugee colonies, if they had survived at all. Now they played without fear, innocent of the terrible things that had been done to secure their future. Maybe that was enough. Maybe survival was worth the moral compromises. Maybe the price of victory, no matter how high, was still worth paying. Or maybe, Thalax thought, that was just what people told themselves to sleep at night after doing terrible things for good reasons. He didn't have the answer, but he knew one thing for certain. The galaxy had asked humanity for help, and humanity had answered. They had been exactly what was needed at the exact moment it was needed. And the galaxy would never forget what humans were capable of when they decided to go to war.